Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. Israel's security forces announced they had thwarted Iranian attempts to smuggle advanced weapons into Judea and Samaria for terror attacks against Israelis. Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, and it is reportedly attempting to ignite the West Bank amid the ongoing war against its terror proxies Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The details in the following report. The Shin Bet, or Israel's security agency, announced on Monday that it had thwarted a major Iranian network for smuggling advanced weapons into Judea and Samaria in an effort to help Palestinian terrorists carry out attacks against Israelis. According to the Shin Bet, the head of the network was Iran's Unit 4000, a special operations division of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, intelligence organization led by Jawad Ghaffari, and Unit 18840 of the Quds Force in Syria, which falls under the Division 840 led by Atzal Bakri. The Shin Bet also named Munir Makda as one of the masterminds of the operation, a known Palestinian terrorist working with Iran and Hezbollah. Makda is said to have been trying to recruit and advance terror attacks against Israelis in the West Bank. The agency said it had discovered the vast network after arresting and interrogating Palestinian suspects plotting to carry out terror attacks against Israel. The smuggling attempt sought to improve terror capabilities in Judea and Samaria and enable Palestinian terrorists to carry out larger-scale and more advanced terror attacks. Among the weapons confiscated included significant explosives with shrapnel capabilities, anti-tank weapons, grenade launchers, plastic explosives, rocket-propelled grenades, assault rifles, and many other weapons. Day 173 of the war in Gaza. The IDF released footage of Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists detailing how the groups used Gaza City's Shifa hospital as a base for terror operations. The army also confirmed the killing of Hamas deputy military commander Marwan Issa. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The terror operatives interrogated were among hundreds detained in the vicinity of Shifa Hospital in recent days, amid ongoing large-scale military operations that began last week. They reveal how the terrorists used Shifa and schools as shelter. Operatives disguised themselves as nurses, and they say Hamas had 600 to 1,000 gunmen at the hospital complex.
فالشفاء أو المدارس زي ما أنت عارف كلنا عارفين أو أماكن مشابهة زي هيك كانت الملجأ أو الملاذ.
أنت جهاد إسلامي. أنا بعرف وين مسكوا ناس من الجهاد الإسلامي في الشفاء.
أوكي. وين مسكوا؟ في الشفاء. في الشفاء. في المستشفى. في المستشفى صحيح. قد إيش صار لك هناك؟ صار الفترة الثانية 25 يوم تقريبا أو من شهر 25. أكم واحد كانوا في شفاء من حماس؟ السؤال هذا متنوع يعني حماس أكثر من جهة في حكومة في مباحث في
بحكي معك على نشطاء حماس.
إيه؟
نشطاء حماس.
مش أقل من 600 ل 1000 يعني.
Separately, the IDF has now confirmed that Hamas deputy military commander Marwan Issa was killed in an Israeli airstrike this month. Issa was eliminated in the strike carried out about 2 weeks ago, along with Ghazi Abu Tama, one of the planners of the October 7th massacre.
לפי מודיעין של שב"כ ואמ"ן, שמרואן איסה חוסל בתקיפה שביצענו לפני כשבועיים יחד עם רזי אבו תמה. מרואן איסה, סגן של מוחמד דף, מספר 3 בחמאס, מתכנני הטבח של 7 באוקטובר.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative, available on the web, Android, and Apple. And Israel is recalling its negotiating team from Qatar after Hamas yet again rejected its latest offer in talks for a hostage deal in truce. This shortly after the U.S. veto of the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza war. Hamas said it will now return to its demand for a permanent ceasefire. ILTV's Devo Klein has more.
Israel is recalling its negotiating team from Qatar after Hamas rejected its latest offer in talks for a hostage deal and truce. In a statement, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says Hamas's position is clear proof it is not interested in continuing talks and a sad testament to the damage caused by the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire passed last night. The PMO accuses Hamas of retreating to its extreme demands, including a complete end to the war and a full IDF withdrawal from Gaza. Hamas informed Qatari and Egyptian mediators that it will stick to its original position, demanding a permanent ceasefire, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, a return of displaced Palestinians, and what it called a real exchange of prisoners. The announcement came shortly after the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution for the first time that calls for a ceasefire in Gaza and the freeing of hostages. Just days ago, Hamas had dropped its demands for an end to the war, allowing the mediation efforts to move forward. Now, they have backtracked. Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected the Hamas demands as delusional multiple times and insisted that its military campaign to destroy Hamas's military capabilities would resume after any hostage truce deal is completed. Israel reportedly offered a detailed document to Hamas setting out its positions on all three phases of a deal for the release of all hostages and has shown flexibility in several key areas. Families of hostages pleaded for their release.
אני קוראת לראשי מדינת ישראל להיות אמיצים, להיות גיבורים, לדעת שרוח העם מאחוריהם. רוח העם איתנה וגיבורה, ואם אתם תשקפו את רוח העם, כל העולם יעריץ אתכם. כל העולם יישר קו.
What happened today in the UN, I don't know how it will be effect on us, but everybody should understand. It can't be a ceasefire without bringing them home. It can't be a ceasefire without bringing them home. It's not possible. First bring them home, and then will be a ceasefire. This is the most logic thing that we can do.
Some 130 hostages, not all of them alive, are believed to remain in Gaza since taken captive during Hamas's October 7th massacre.
And meanwhile, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh landing in Tehran for meetings with Iranian officials. Coincidence?
And Prime Minister Netanyahu has warned his Likud party that without the passage of his IDF draft bill, his coalition government will fall. The draft bill, should it pass, would extend the exemption from IDF conscription for ultra-Orthodox Jews. Netanyahu announced to his party that he would not renege on passing the ultra-Orthodox draft bill and that without the bill, the government could not remain in place. Netanyahu's announcement came after War Cabinet Minister and United Unity Chair Benny Gantz warned that he would leave the government should the bill be passed, and reports of several Likud ministers opposed to the bill.
העם לא יוכל להשלים איתה. הכנסת לא תוכל להצביע בעדה. וחבריי ואני לא נוכל להיות חברים בממשלת החירום אם חקיקה כזו תעבור בכנסת ותיכנס לספר החוקים של מדינת ישראל באופן שיפגע באחדות ובביטחון המדינה בכלל ובזמן מלחמה בפרט.
Gantz said the nation demanded that there be more equal sharing of the burden.
מתווה חוק הגיוס כפי שמגבשת הממשלה הוא כשל ערכי חמור שיביא לקרע עמוק בתוכנו בשעה שאנו צריכים להילחם ביחד מול אויבינו.
The subject of drafting the ultra-Orthodox into the army has been a point of deep contention in the public, including protests in the streets on both sides of the issue. Ahead of his trip to Washington, Defense Minister Gallant from Likud announced that he would not support the government bill. And joining us now is Times of Israel political reporter Sam Sokol. Sam, it's sounding serious. One does not often hear Netanyahu in a kind of a panic mode. He says the bill needs to pass or the government will fall. Is he right, and does he have the votes to pass it?
So the ultra-Orthodox parties have come out very hard against this bill, and Netanyahu for a very long time has been dependent on these parties for his ability to create a coalition. The United Torah Judaism Party has said that the drafting of people who are learning full-time in yeshiva will be too much for them, and that could lead to their exit from the coalition. At the same time, he's seeing pressure from both within his own Likud party and members of the coalition, such as Benny Gantz, who was explicitly said, I'm going to leave if this passes. Now, the problem is that Netanyahu has been able to sort of kick the can down the road for years, getting extension after extension from the High Court of Justice, which previously ruled that the current situation is unconstitutional, but they've allowed him chance after chance to bring legislation to sort of fix the issue. Now, we're coming up against a hard deadline on this, and Netanyahu really doesn't have much maneuvering room anymore. A draft piece of legislation that he's going to present for approval in the cabinet tomorrow was withdrawn after the Attorney General said that she would be unable to legally defend it. It was legally indefensible. And Netanyahu has just now, this afternoon, presented a revised version of the legislation, which comes closer to much closer to what critics of the ultra-Orthodox exemption have been calling for. But it remains to be seen how it will be accepted within the cabinet. So far, we've seen Gantz coming out against it.
I don't hear Netanyahu actually arguing that it's a good bill that would share the burden in society. Is it all about coalition politics? We need the soldiers. We need more soldiers.
I think it is about coalition politics. Netanyahu has been, the last decade, beholden to the ultra-Orthodox parties to stay in power. Without Shas and United Torah Judaism, he really is in a very bad state politically, and he's doing what he can to try to please both sides. He knows that the status quo can't remain, but he also has much less maneuvering room than he would wish. Netanyahu has stated in the past that he understands that the draft of the ultra-Orthodox is important, but he seems to be placing a higher priority on his political survival.
But Sam, Netanyahu is the master politician in Israel. It seems like he's in a trap. His ultra-Orthodox coalition partners on one side, Gantz and members of the Likud on the other. What's his way out here?
Well, he's trying to reconcile two irreconcilable positions, and that's really a problem for him. As I said, he's starting to really run out of maneuvering room. The new draft that he's pushing forward, as I said, comes closer. It pushes to have annual targets, to have financial sanctions for yeshivas that fail to meet that target, and it calls for the establishment of new service tracks for the ultra-Orthodox. As I said, we'll see if it's enough to satisfy both the court and his non-ultra-Orthodox political allies, but that remains to be seen.
Sam, before we run out of time, I just want to ask you this. If the bill does not pass, does it mean new elections, or could some kind of a new coalition emerge without the ultra-Orthodox?
That remains to be seen. The truth of the matter is that the one thing that we can say with certainty about Israeli politics is that it's impossible to predict.
Nothing is certain in Israeli politics. Sam, have a remaining holiday, a happy holiday, Purim in Jerusalem, and regards to my friends in the Marechet of Times of Israel.
Thank you very much.
And in the wake of the war in the north, more than 60,000 residents of Israeli towns and communities bordering Lebanon remain out of their homes. They've been displaced for more than 170 days due to cross-border fighting. And worse, they have no clue when they can return home. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Israel has created a kind of security zone against Hezbollah attacks. But instead of an IDF operation to create a buffer zone inside Lebanon to push the terrorists away from the border, the security zone is inside northern Israel. Over 60,000 residents were pushed out of their towns and villages in early October, and there are no promises of when they can return.
We have 60,000 Israelis that are evacuated by the order of the government, 60, meaning that they took a suitcase and they went out very quickly. Most of them went out without getting orders. They live, when I say live next to the border, literally It's defense of the community and defense of the border almost the same.
With government subsidy, most remain evacuated to safer areas in central Israel, leaving their communities empty and deserted.
We are a ghost city, and this is an unspeakable situation. People are refugees in their own home, and it must change. We cannot let it continue.
Even with Iron Dome air defense, some rockets have hit targets near the border. The damages to homes and infrastructure are significant. The Iran-backed Hezbollah and the IDF have been trading fire since the start of the war in Gaza from October 7th. Hezbollah began firing rockets into Israel, and Israel has responded with deadly force. Israeli leaders have warned that a war with Hezbollah is not unlikely.
The interest of Hezbollah today, in my point of view, of course this is my analysis, is to drag Israel into war, is to create an unbearable situation for Israel, to create a feeling of insecure in these communities and even further south. I live 9 kilometers from the border. My life completely changed.
The view from Kiryat Shmona is that the current situation must change either through diplomacy or war. Now, anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world, with attacks against Jews becoming a daily occurrence. And so Israel is now calling for a global coalition to fight against this age-old phenomenon. Well, joining us to discuss is Yuval David, an Emmy award-winning actor, filmmaker, news commentator, and activist. Yuval, welcome to ILTV.
Thank you for having me on. Above everything else that you just introduced me as, is I'm a Jewish activist. I have been a Jewish activist for the majority of my life in the battle against anti-Semitism, in the battle against the people who hate us, the Jewish people, in support of Israel, and hoping to activate all Jews and our allies to be soldiers in this war.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I was last living in the United States back in the 1970s, mid-70s, and I too was a Jewish activist, a Zionist activist, and ended up moving here. I remember dealing with the Black Panthers, the SDS, neo-Nazis, the John Birch Society. Why do you guys think things are so much worse today?
Things are worse today because things started developing. Anti-Semitism was developing within collegiate environments, within left-leaning civil rights and social justice movements, within all of these different elements of society, to the point that they became acceptable, that the hatred of Jews became acceptable in the spaces that seek justice, that seek tolerance, that seek acceptance and rights for other people. And within those movements, the hatred of Jews became allowed. Now, in this crazy world that we live in, anti-Semitism is openly accepted in the light of day. Those haters no longer lurk in the shadows. They are seen in our political forums. They're seen across media. They're definitely seen across social media, but even out in public, where it's dangerous for Jews to walk around with things like this, a Magen David, around our necks.
Well, even back then in the 1970s, I came to the conclusion that the only solution for anti-Semitism, as far as I'm concerned, in the long term, is to come on Aliyah and to live here. In the meantime, while I was back in the States, we were spending our time protecting synagogues, learning self-defense, and actually learning how to shoot guns. Do you advise any of those things for the Jewish community?
Yeah, we're back in those times. I'm on a speaking tour across the United States and Canada. I speak to Jewish communities. Actually, I speak with, I don't speak to empower these communities to be strong Jews, to be strong allies of the Jewish people. That requires an understanding of self-defense. It requires further education to understand our peoplehood, to understand our history, and to understand who we are today. Sadly, a strange phenomenon within the Jewish experience is that much of our Jewish history has been defined by anti-Semites, by the people who hate Jewish people. That's why we talk about unity. That's why this connection between Jews in Israel and Jews around the world is so very important. We are all in this war together. We're going to lose many battles. and we already have, and we're going to continue to. But if we want to win this war, we need to all recognize that everybody has to do something, whether you run for office, whether you are a politician, whether you support and work within an organization, write letters, march in the streets, are active on social media, or even just follow social media influencers like myself.
Yuval, sorry we're out of time now. Keep up the good fight and have a happy Purim.
We're all in this together. Thank you so much.
And staying with Purim celebrations in the capital, due to the war, most public celebrations were put on hold this year, but not so in Jerusalem. This year, and for the first time in over 40 years, the city decided to hold a Purim parade. ILTV's Rachel Safdie is at the parade. Rachel, what can you tell us about it?
Hi, Steve. Well, yes, I'm standing here in Jerusalem as we're having the first Purim parade in 42 years. As you've said, these festivities are usually seen in cities like Holon and Tel Aviv, which were canceled this year due to the war, and yet Jerusalem is holding the first parade in 42 years. Now, there were some changes, and there was a lot of conversation regarding if this parade should even happen, as we are having a war and we still have 134 hostages in the Gaza Strip right now. And so the mayor of Jerusalem actually met with representatives of the hostage families on Thursday, a few days prior to the parade, and they made some changes so that the parade wouldn't be just a generalized a Purim parade celebrating the Jewish holiday as usual, but would also commemorate the families of the hostages, the families that have lost people in this war, and we do see those changes. Now, there are still protests. There is a protest in the Mamilla Mall, relatively close to where the parade is happening, saying it is still October 7th, and people are still against the fact that Jerusalem is having a parade, and yet we do see different sorts of aspects of the parade celebrating the fact that there are soldiers fighting in this war and that there are still hostages, remembering that there are still hostages there.
And as you said, Rachel, we're in a war and there are people who are still against the parade. So how is the overall experience?
Yes, so it's definitely a unique experience, a different experience from any Purim parade we've ever seen in Israel, especially since it's the first time in so long that it's happening in Jerusalem. What's interesting to note is that while we still see people celebrating and a lot of kids in costume and having fun, we still have a lot of aspects of this parade that do remind us of the war and talk about the hostages that are still there. So we had a man who's a reservist who fought in Gaza and actually lost both of his hands, and he came here to speak in the parade. We also see a lot of the cars that are bringing in huge sculptures and different attractions actually have the yellow band, the hostages band. We also saw the time clock reminding us that the hostages have been in Gaza for 171 days. So even so, we do see people having fun, a lot of kids in costumes. We also see reservists, and we also see people who remind us of the fact that we're still in a war.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.